Now we move on, ladies and gentlemen, because first of all, a massive welcome back, and, well, Weens. Oh dear lord, they are some of the most annoying people you'll ever find. I mean, not just, on the internet, but in real life. Like, the second you hear these guys talking, you'll know exactly what they're like. So, without further ado, Bob Chandler trying to outsmart a Ween attempting to prank call Chris. Are you 6 years old or something? Also, Chris going, don't worry about those Weens. You know you're safe around me and my loves. Smiley face, lightning heart, lightning. Chris attempting to persuade a fan Weens won't hassle them at BronyCon. Weening or fail trolling is the act of attempting to troll someone but ultimately failing at it the whole way through and not receiving any significant results. Typically due to inexperience with lolcow culture, the people that do this are often referred to as Weens, not to be confused with the alternative rock band. A corruption of the phrase epic win, Weens are wannabe trolls who attempt to recreate the antics of prominent trolls, without being aware that there was so much manipulation behind the scenes to goad Chris into performing for the trolls, and therefore just embarrasses themselves, as well as everybody else involved, indirectly or non-directly or at all, to be honest. Think we're exaggerating? Well, few of these videos will come across. Now, these are pretty much just Blue Spike and amongst others. They try to prank call Chris and stuff like that. The reason why these videos exist at all is because, because Chris had doxed himself by releasing, his home address and home number many, many times. Apparently, this situation involving prank calling had existed for years, but won't be the first or the last. We'll be talking about that anytime soon. Right. Examples of weaning. Trolling plans, no matter how elaborate, that end up failing. Taking advantage of Chris by pretending to white knight him. The Quick Protect Squad is a notorious example of this. Prank calling Chris or his mother Barbara. Double dumbass points is just to yell, Julie, Julie, or Ian Brandon Anderson / something, or other ancient memes. Prank takeaway deliveries under Chris's name and address. Not only is this just annoying for anyone involved, on top of wasting both money and food, but numerous restaurants in Chris's area, namely Papa John's, have blacklisted his address precisely to prevent this. A-logging. While not all Weens are A-logs and vice versa, the two do often overlap. A-log himself was as much of a Ween as your average A-log in numerous ways. Enabling Chris's fantastical beliefs. Chris's mind is already foobarred up its own merits, and people such as the Idea Guys have done much more than enough mental damage to him. Once again, while not all Weens are enablers and vice versa, they tend to overlap. Making fake Facebook and Twitter profiles of people that Chris follows. Spamming Chris's Facebook pages with random pictures of his old triggers to try and get a raise out of him, such as of all Sonic's redesign in Sonic Boom. Scavenging emails, letters, or social media messages. It may be just plain sad to say, but even troll telling Chris to get a job has become Ween lingo. Butting into conversations Chris is having with other people online, especially if he isn't doing anything particularly wrong at the moment, which is almost 99% of the time. This was sadly way too common with the Doopy Do-Over saga. Attempting to contact. If it sounds like there's a lot, well, it gets worse than this. Attempting to contact people who once interacted with Chris, but have since cut off all ties with him. Megan, Cole, The Wallflower, Mary Lee Walsh, Adam Stackhouse, Michael Snyder, etc. And drag them back into the spotlight against their wishes. Terrible fan fiction and fan art that wittily deconstructs Sonichu and where it takes place as a Scafarian dystopia. Sorry folks, but Aspachu, A Girl Who Brought Down the World, Sonichu the Animated Series, and the Quick Collateral not only already did this, but have also milked the concept for everything it's worth. Double dumbass points if your fan work is even more grotesque, gory, or perverse than Sonichu already is, as seen in the picture below. Triple dumbass points if focusing predominantly on the slaughter of Sonnies and Rosies. Mass reporting in an attempt to get his social media accounts shut down. Spouting tired old Chris memes in place where Christorians lurk, or even in places where most of the members don't even know about Chris. Either way, it's very annoying. Spoiling Chris's legitimate attempts at doing commissions and participating in contests on e-commerce. This extends to making frivolous or exaggerated claims of Chris's misconduct in feedback on sites like eBay or YouTube. Sending unwanted mail to Chris's address, like glitter bombs and letters for PewDiePie. Making terrible rap songs about Chris. Harassing bronies whose content Chris enjoys into blocking him on Twitter. Recreating his Wikipedia page as a social experiment. Spamming his tweets with, "Where's the comics? He's not going to respond, so don't even try." Hacking into Chris's YouTube account to upload a video of someone screaming, "Julet." Sending letters to Chris to persuade him into saying or doing things while under the belief he is Jesus. Translating Ian Brandon Anderson into a writing system Chris doesn't understand and telling him it's a blessing in another language. Writing a fake letter claiming it to be sent by Chris in an undisclosed location and directing it towards another locale. Funding a P-word film about Chris. Leaving 1-star reviews on places Chris has visited because Chris has visited them. Suggesting that Chris should start an OnlyFans. Making fake obituaries stating Barb or any other historical figures have died. Chasing down Chris and trying to shove a camera in his face after seeing him in public. Donating your own money for the sole purpose of flashing messages like Julet and Ian Brandon Anderson something. Or anything related to Chris's affair with Bob during his live streams, especially when it has nothing to do with the topics. Telling Chris about his past lives. Giving Chris money to ask for his thoughts on your shitty YouTube videos. Worse still is creating AI videos claiming to be Chris and giving him money so he'll watch them. Impersonating historical figures. Even cringier still, attempting to make AI art copying Chris's style and claiming you commissioned him to make it. Worst of all, breaking the law and needlessly risking a life-altering criminal record in pursuit of the lulz. This includes, but is certainly not limited to, vandalizing or trespassing on Chris's property, which includes egging his house, illegally recording telephone conversations, stalking and harassment of him, his mother and the rest of their extended family, stealing from them, extortion, or threatening them with violence or even outright murder. This also applies to aiding and or encouraging other Weens or Chris himself to do so. We really shouldn't have to say it at this point, but for goodness sake, don't do any of this. Now that we've got that, okay, I think we're ready to move on. What weaning is specifically not. As annoying and unhelpful as weaning is, the term has ended up being severely misused by much of the quickosphere to the point where some consider it to be any form of interest or interaction at any point with Chris or the world relating to him and his misadventures. As such, it's important to keep in mind what actions are not considered the correct definition of the term. Casual observation and discussion of Chris and his circumstances in places, such as this very wiki or Kiwi Farms, where they are permitted and or actually relevant to the topic at hand. Any trolling plan that actually succeeds to some extent, be it good or bad for Chris, original or cringy, etc. Asking basic repetitive Chris questions as a newbie, regardless of if it's to do with recent events or those from the classic era and such. Even the most devoted Christorians had to start somewhere. Coming up with speculative Christory based on past and ongoing events. Making fan media, art, fanfiction, animations, cosplay, etc. of the Sonichu series, so long as it's not exclusively perverse, grotesque, or intentionally poorly made, and you don't go out of your way to show it to Chris. Helping to document and provide information on developments and occurrences in Chris's life as they come. The same goes for any corrections and confirmations with appropriate evidence of ambiguous and or unconfirmed information. Visiting public locations where Chris is well known to have been or is otherwise associated with, such as the Charlottesville Fashion Square, Gear Hearts, the End Games, or Piedmont, Virginia Community College. Of course, this is so long as you don't try to fail troll or otherwise harass anyone for info on Chris. If you do visit these places, consider doing some good out of it as well as supporting them and the local community through donating to, if applicable, and or purchasing from them. And finally, visiting 14 Branch Lane Court, so long as it doesn't involve illegally trespassing or trying to harass Barb or anyone who resides there. Arguments against trolling attempts. Now, we know what you're thinking about. You're not one of those try-hard 13-year-olds who still think that screaming Julie or Ian Brandon something at Chris, spamming his Twitter or YouTube comment section with pickles and other outdated catchphrases and memes, making and sending him badly made parody comics, or trying to rehash the Liquid Chris saga is the height of wit. You've come up against a great plan to really get under Chris's skin. Bring back the good old days and all that stuff. However, 99.9% of the time, you should just shit-can your trolling plans and move on with your life. Why, you may ask? The Chris of today is nothing like his former self. Chris has come and gone a long way since his internet debut on the Something Awful forums. He has gone from a simple-minded man with childlike tendencies that made a bunch of comics which are so bad they're fascinating, to a jaded, chronically depressed and mentally disturbed hippie that's formed a small doomsday cult around said comics. It is important to note that Chris, although still very gullible and severely detached from reality, and is debatably still a thinking person, whatever gets him riled up nowadays ultimately depends on the time and situation. Therefore, a lot of the commonly associated triggers he had years ago will not necessarily transfer over to the present day. It should also be noted that, because of this change in perspective, trolling hits differently in this day and age than it did before Chris lost his father, which is incidentally the point where most of Chris's most famous trolls opted to leave him alone. The general culture around Chris Chan himself has changed significantly as well. While past trolls like Clyde Cash and Liquid Chris were praised for a time, and are still fondly remembered and respected by those who don't see them as being as bad as Chris, the days of trolling Chris as the heteronormative, egotistical man-child have faded to trolling Chris as a mentally ill, self-destructive, broken shell of a human being. The only people to really succeed in gaining infamy comparable to the trolls of the classic era, such as the Idea Guys and Jacob Sockness, are subsequently derided as the perverted, exploitative abusers that they are, rather than treated as internet legends. The irony in all of this is that most trolling attempts no longer faze Chris at all, and those that do somehow succeed are only viewed as further support for his cult. Therefore, you should never expect to be one of the cool kids just by fail trolling Chris. Times have changed, so it's best to move on to better targets. This leads us to the next point. There are, and always will be, much better and bigger targets than Chris. If you're willing to put in that much effort into trolling Chris, why not make yourself useful and apply that same effort to going after better victims? As much as the Quickie analyzes and discusses in detail his numerous odd behaviors and personality flaws, Chris doesn't come close to the bottom of the barrel of internet scumbags. Neo-Nazis and other hate groups, social justice warriors, abusive lovers and parents, scam artists, the P word, the EP word, corrupt politicians and corporations, religious zealots, ZP words, and other animal abusers, hackers, SK words and malware writers, distributors, gang members, terrorists and their online recruiters, A-logs, enablers, and many other assorted scumbags are much more deserving of concentrated trolling than Chris will ever be. Even if you don't give a shit who the troll baiting is, as long as it gets laughs under lucrisities, the Chris of today just isn't as amenable to trolling as he used to be. As discussed beforehand, the amount of effort you would need to put into navigating around his paranoia and autistic sensibilities would be staggering to say the least. And even if you do manage to bypass these obstacles, what is there left to do to him? Anything amusing about him has already been exhausted, except the shit he does on his own initiative, also discussed further below. All that is left on him at this point is a withered husk of a lolcow. As much as you may try to milk from it, you'll be hard-pressed not only to get cobwebs, dust and shriveled dead insects in return, but with all that in mind, you may as well just spend your time on another lolcow who hasn't been inured to years of deceit and humiliation. For most aspiring trolls, the only reason to pick Chris over another internet jackass is because he's relatively well known even today, and you have a ready-made audience available to appreciate your efforts, but that's just you being lazy, not some trolling mastermind. Meanwhile, the Chris of today is not quite as gullible as he used to be. Now granted, almost no one on Earth is as naive as Chris was back in 2007. However, since then, Chris has gradually learned that when he's contacted by people claiming to be Shigeru Miyamoto, Batman, Vanessa Hudgens, someone from his past, or even his own relatives, chances are he's just being trolled. In fact, the naivety of the younger Chris has been swapped for an extreme distrust of anyone who tries to contact him, to the extent where he's even turned down legitimate attempts to get in touch by people he's actually known at high school or college. This hasn't been helped at all by the Weens. According to senior trolls, Chris was once contacted by 10 people claiming to be Megan at the same time, all of them claiming to be the true and honest Megan Schroeder, and telling him not to believe the others. Chris also vets those who try to bait him with fake social media accounts of people that he follows. Weens tried this during the Doopy saga, only for Chris to embarrass them by thoroughly debunking their claims complete with evidence. As of today, Chris simply doesn't care about whatever hackneyed, inane scheme you've come up with for him. Even the most persistent attempts at bribery don't seem to affect him as much as they used to. Your idea is probably not original. Whatever your scheme is, it's probably been done before, and most likely better. It's pretty much impossible to top getting Chris to believe that then president of Nintendo was interested in his work, or that there was a dang dirty imposter whom everyone else thought was the real Chris and stealing his richly deserved fame. Or convincing Chris to destroy his own life upgrade on camera in an attempt to claim a $9,001 bounty that never actually existed. Or even simply pulling some strings to have Chris's father walk in on him whilst he is, well, sharpening his pencils. By and large, most modern trolling plans tend to be some incredibly minor variation on something that's already been done. For example, what if we got his high school ring? Or what if we got him to see another parody of his comic? In short, you're wasting your time trying to rehash older trolling events because we've all seen it before. More importantly, so has Chris, who would very likely figure out what you're going to do and where you're coming from. Weenery discourages Chris from producing content. Chris is at his most productive when he believes he has lots of fans and everyone, barring a few trolls here and there, loves him. Most agree that Weenery is detrimental to this strange symbiotic relationship, and it is considered to be one of the most predominant causes of the slump in content between 2011 and 2014. In that time, Chris entered a hiatus as a result of combination of mourning for his then recently deceased father and a constant stream of Weenery over the years that have made him think of himself as a victim who wouldn't be able to do anything without being harassed. As a result, he became far more private, meaning barely any content for us. It took several long years for him to re-emerge from his hiatus. It is also worth mentioning that Chris produces much better content when left to his own devices. Since his semi-retreat from the public eye after his father's death and before he was jailed for incest, Chris has been prosecuted twice, concocted outlandish conspiracy theories, and centered on someone who hasn't spoken to him for years, accidentally set fire to his own house, and eventually continued working on the previously unfinished Solitude issue 11. Again, and sliced his own taint open with a knife as part of a harebrained attempt to grow out his own China. All of this without any ineptus or impetus from trolls alike. Likewise, let's not forget the entire Merrily Walsh saga, along with at least 2 different independent blogs of Chris's bizarre mannerisms and behaviours. Happened before he even rose to fame. Don't rush the master of America's favourite game. If you fail hard enough, you will become a target of trolling yourself. Anthony A. Logato is the textbook example of trolling, backfiring on the would-be troll. And it's important to remember that he would never have attracted the attention on the internet if he had simply toned down the vitriol enough to make it less obvious that he was absolutely obsessed with Chris. It was, thereafter, a fairly obvious leap in intuition to assume that someone with that level of hysteria and monomania over someone they had never even met would have some skeletons in their own closet. Not surprisingly, A-Log had more than a few. These included terrible homemade Yif fanfiction featuring a tellingly moderately endowed Fox OC, a huge cache of disturbing Rule 34, a noticeable portion of which included minors, a laughably poor college radio show from which he almost got fired after being caught sharpening his pencils in the studio, and a video where A-Log does an excruciatingly unfunny stand-up comedy bit, revolving almost entirely around attacking Chris and what the radio was playing at the time, all before a crowd who, judging by the reaction, had never even heard of Chris. A more recent example of this is the case of Michael Hurties. After a myriad of sock puppet accounts, spam messages to Chris, and anyone he conversed with numbering in the thousands, mostly consisting of outdated memes and ad hominem attacks, and enough angry rants from him to also be described as being truly obsessed with Chris, it naturally led to some digging. Sure enough, Hurties, who's revealed to be an unemployed furry, who is somehow even less mature and even more prone to rage than Chris, despite being nearly 20 years older than him, and having a number of highly embarrassing things to his name, including criminal convictions and a newspaper article of him in a fursuit discussing yiffing. Consequently, he became a huge laughingstock overnight, not only turning into a lolcow himself, but it even got him to the point where Chris himself dismissed Hurties, and by extension everything he'd done, as an irrelevance. Damn. By the same token, obsessive and exclusively weenery is a dangerously likely to get you noticed by other trolls who will, in turn, hoist you on your own pedestal. In other words, it's akin to plugging in a huge neon sign pointing the trolls straight to your collection of Goku, X and Frank /fiction and boy band shrines. Even successful trolls can become targets. After several months manipulating Chris, the Idea Guys had their real-world identities exposed in the first half of 2018. Between October 2017 and March 2020, Kiwi Farms officially encouraged users to dox Weens as a deterrent. Several would-be Weens who have been foiled in this way, and the effects have possibly spread into their real lives. Chris himself has also carelessly exposed those who try to interact with him while remaining anonymous. Remember, there is an energetic community devoted to recording every facet of Chris's life and interactions. You will be noticed. And as covered in more detail below, the attention you'll end up receiving will likely be the undesirable kind. Even if you do somehow catch Chris's attention, due to her edgy behavior, A-logging directed towards Chris, attempts at weaning Chris, and spreading misinformation when faced with being doxxed, Bella has been widely disgraced by the greater Quickosphere as a result of these things. And finally, even if you do succeed, you will likely regret it later. Chris Chan he's an enigma, which is to so many people, they thought he was a troll, because they're like, there's no way that this MF is real, because he's like the saddest human being ever. And it's sad because it's like, I spent 4 years of my life with him, and people are like, bring it back. And I'm like, no, let it die. It's like depressing. It's not the golden age. It's the depressing age. This is on Spaz Kid, on the unwanted attention he received from Weens. Even to this day, Spaz Kid is the guy who gave us the Solitude, the animated series, by the way. There's been tons of things in my life I've regretted and hated doing later on. All of the stuff from 10 years ago was one of them. I've moved past everything that happened those many years ago. And obviously, I'm a different person now. It wasn't funny and was a very A-log thing to do. Nothing much else I can say. That's from Blue Spike, by the way, and yeah, that's the infamous Blue Spike. All too often, trolls that do somehow manage to succeed in extracting lols from Chris end up getting more than they bargained for. For example, Spaz Kid stopped making Solitude the animated series when he began to pity Chris and realised he wasn't worth trolling. On top of a lot of unseen drama involved with the series writers and voice actors, but still regularly finds himself, as seen above, hounded by obsessive Weens and A-logs to keep making it against his wishes. Liquid Chris may have had to spend a long time fending off accusations from people outside of the Chris Chan bubble of tormenting an emotionally vulnerable autistic man for his own amusement. Blue Spike will turn 30 someday, and even then will still be thought of as the crazed sadistic pervert who, at the age of 13, willingly listened to a 27-year-old sharpen his pencil repeatedly for hours on end and force him to shove a broken clay medallion up his ass. Even after he has since considerably matured and openly shown remorse for his previous actions, then the idea guys may have to deal with many more long-term legal troubles one day for manipulating a mentally handicapped man into abusing himself and extorting frivolities and large sums of money from him, all for a stupid, cruel joke that amused no one but themselves. To add to the irony, people who don't intentionally upset Chris are still getting unwanted attention from Weens. Do you think that Adam Stackhouse enjoys being inundated with various unwanted, "you prevented Chris from R-wording Megan? Congrats" messages in his email box, especially since he has openly made peace with Chris in 2018? Or that Mary Lee Walsh appreciates seeing herself as a nubile anime blonde who exists solely to torment a virgin with rage every time she or her students uses Google. Or that Michael Slider likes being constantly reminded by Weens by being harassed and hit by a car, though misguided attempts to praise him, or being tormented about said events almost a decade later, on the guest book of his own father's funeral. In all of these cases, the answer is a big fat no. And also, finally, there is absolutely nothing left to gain from the community surrounding Chris. Not only do you have the active Chris Chan community, who are more than willing to come after most wannabes who attempt to do so, but also how the consequences will, in such circumstances, will likely end up spreading into your actual life, as has been seen on numerous occasions. Even without going in with the intention to troll, fan documentaries and information sources, such as this very wiki, already extensively cover Chris and his life, and when new events and such occur, it's more than likely already covered by them without you needing to go in that deeply. Yeah. As I said at the beginning of this, and it's fitting we're going to end it with this, know which side of the screen you're on. I mean, you may think Chris can't see you or the rest of the world can't see you, but, well, it doesn't work quite like that. Windows to the souls, ladies and gentlemen, because if I can see out, then people can see in as well. But with that being said, that's why I use NordVPN. It's the only other way to put it. And with that being said, I'll see you guys again next time. Thank you.